Kelowna Catastrophe, Climate Change, or Preventable Disaster. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. I'm recording this on August the 20th, 2023. There's a state of emergency declared across British Columbia. Kelowna is in a state of evacuation, and there are dozens of other wildfires burning across the province. Some people have lost their homes. We don't know how many yet. Some communities appear to have been burnt to the ground. But we'll be having more details on that over the next few days. I want to talk with everyone now, today, despite the fact that these tragic events are still going on, because the tendency has been in the media and with various officials to claim that this is caused by climate change. I want to show you that the biggest problem we face now is that the climate change movement will divert precious and limited public funds from restoration and bringing people back into their communities, and instead it will be diverted to green crony climate change projects. And in fact, I would say that that is fundamentally why these tragedies have occurred. Of course, something sparked the fire. Of course, there were high winds. But I think that you'll see as I go through the presentation that there are many things that could have been done, that should have been done, that were known to be dangers that were not taken care of. This is not blaming the victims. This is asking all of us, society and our government leaders, to please focus on the things that we can do to be prepared for wildfire season. Wildfire season is like winter. It happens every year. And you'd never go into winter without enough snowplows or enough sanders or enough people to manage the road transportation systems when they get all messed up because of snowstorms. And yet it seems like we keep stumbling into wildfire season and acting surprised when terrible things happen, despite the fact that I think we have very good wildfire crews. There are so many things that we could do as communities, as municipalities, as counties, as provinces, to help mitigate wildfires. And I'm not the expert. There's dozens and dozens of studies. I'll show you some of them. And they're all sitting on a shelf somewhere. That's the problem. So let's see what I found for you. And please, of course, put your own comments down below. Not everyone will agree. That's fine. We should talk about this. You don't have to agree. So what's wrong with this picture? Kelowna 2003 and 2023. The Climate Bible, that's the IPCC reports, does not attribute wildfire to human-caused climate change. So why do you? This is from a post by Roger Pielke Jr. He's been working with the insurance industry for 25 years, tracking various kinds of natural disasters, wildfire being one of them. He's very conversant on the topic and has been a past contributor to the IPCC. He does not share our particular view on climate change, that the sun is the main driver, but he does share our view that people should be more practical about these things. The IPCC has not detected or attributed fire occurrence or area burned to human-caused climate change. So keep that in mind. The alleged climate experts of the world do not attribute wildfire occurrence or area burned to human-caused climate change. PLK writes, for a wildfire to occur requires more than just fire weather, which is what the IPCC discusses. It also requires fuel and a source of ignition. In fact, according to the IPCC, the weather is not the most important factor in fire. Human activities have become the dominant driver. Indeed, most wildfires are started by human activity. And that doesn't mean arson. It means a diverse set of human activities. We'll look at some of them as we go through. And yet, here we have all these quote-unquote climate experts, name-calling and bullying people. We have Mark Carney here expressing sadness over his hometown is Fort Smith in the Northwest Territories, and he's feeling very sad that the city is facing evacuation at Yellowknife. And he says that he knows that extreme weather events today in the north and this year are a product of the climate crisis. He's the UN climate czar. You would think that he would know what the IPCC says, but obviously he's misleading the public. Here's Catherine McKenna, former Environment and Climate Change Minister in Canada. Conservative politicians want to fight about a price on carbon pollution. You want to make it free to pollute, while Canadians pay with their lives threatened, homes destroyed, and their communities obliterated. So what are you going to do? You are the arsonists. This is shocking, coming from some kind of a former leader, a former elected official in Canada. And here we have a children's entertainer, Rafi Kovakian, also a well-known climate expert, saying, as long as I can remember, I used to look forward to summer. That's changed. Now it's a season of some trepidation, anxiety, blame, oil, gas, lies, and deceit, climate denial, and dinosaur politicians. We deserve better. Our kids depend on us for a stable climate. Summers to enjoy. Well, yes, Rafi, we do deserve better. You must stop scaring little children. Stop it. Just stop scaring children. There is no such thing as a stable climate. The climate has never been stable. You're making things up. If you go back and look in the historical record, as I showed you at the very beginning, there have been very serious wildfires in Kelowna just in the past 10, 20 years. 2003, 2009, and now this year. And there were wildfires in BC before, very serious ones. So stop pretending that this is something new. It's not. So meanwhile, back in reality then and now. So here's a picture of Kelowna about 100 years ago, and here is Kelowna today before the wildfire. Oops, sorry about that. So in the 100-year then and now photo pair, you can see that historically this is a grassland down here. Grassland landscape, land use transition to orchards. And almost a century later, it's largely a high-density urban area choked with trees and grassland replaced with scruffy forest. Grasslands have a fuel load of about 0.3 kilograms per square meter. Scruffy forests have a 5 kilogram per hectare. There's about 16 times more fuel in the forests than grasslands, but the head fire intensity is 166,000 times more intense. Head fire is the line of fire that moves with the wind. And sadly, Kelowna has allowed development to build into the forest. And if you're a fire smart person, this is going to be curling your hair, because as quaint as it is to have houses surrounded by these lovely trees and cabins in the woods, this is an actual disaster for firefighters and for the spread of wildfires, because there's fuel sources everywhere here, and they're all right next to each other, and they're all right next to the houses. Now, if people were following FireWise and FireSmart recommendations, they would create an exclusion zone around their house. Now, it's not as quaint, but it's far safer. And so maybe people will think about that more in the future. Of course, that would also require a different kind of urban planning, because these houses as you can see, are quite closely set. So it's really the wildland-urban interface that's the problem here. This is the area where human development meets or intermingles with the natural environment. And so that means people, right? And people are interacting with the natural environment, sometimes in safe ways and sometimes not. In 2003, Kelowna was about 95,000 people. The population today is about 140,000 people. West Kelowna was about 20,000 in 2003. Today it's 36,000. You don't have to talk about climate change to recognize that there's a problem. People are encroaching on wild land. Fuel loads in surrounding forests are huge. I'll show you some of that later. And homes are being built right into the forest with little regard for fire smart. BC's interior is a camping, hiking, vacation wonderland, but just one negligent person, one nutter, one accident, one power line sparking on a tree on a windy day, and you can have catastrophe. So this is from the Fire Smart website in Téléfeu in French. They have a French translation button there. And it shows you that wildland fuels are all the vegetation, the natural and cultivated, and built fuels are all the man-made structures, the buildings and infrastructure. So wildland fuels and built fuels all have different burning characteristics. When combined, they create uniquely complex conditions that affect the ignition and spread of fire that are very different than the conditions created by an isolated structural or wildland fire. This is called the wildland-urban interface fuel complex, often said as WUI. By understanding the complexities of these combined fuels, along with considering the topographic and weather conditions that affect the combustibility of these fuels, we can better appreciate the unique and often overwhelming challenges that a WUI fire presents, especially when it comes to suppression attempts. So it's very difficult to put out these kind of fires. And let's just have a look at the topography, especially for people who are not from the West or from Canada. So this is British Columbia on the west coast. Vancouver is down here. You may be familiar with that city. Kelowna is in the center of the southern part of BC. And as you can see, this is quite a mountainous region. There are a number of beautiful lakes here, and it's quite a desertified region as well. Very hot, very dry, and people love it in the summer. It's a fabulous place to go. So you can see Okanagan Lake here and Kelowna is actually split in half by the lake. But you can see how dramatic some of the elevations are, and that there are these kind of narrow canyons and valleys and such like. This makes it really difficult to get wildfire fighting equipment on the ground in and out of these neighborhoods, because this is all built up with neighborhoods here all along this way. Here we have a bit more of a plain, and that's where the main part of the city is. But the winds come generally from the west to the east. So if there's a fire that starts over here, and we'll look at that a bit later, then, you know, all the embers can jump the lake, which they did in the past recent fires. A complicating factor in Western Canada is the fact that we have about 18 million hectares of standing deadwood. These are trees that died from the pine beetle infestation. And this is a map from 2012. Most of these dead trees are still standing there. The perfect fuel by now. Imagine how tinder dry they are. So have people tried to do something about this? Sure they have. Yes. There are no less than 6 wildfire community preparedness plans for the West Kelowna and Kelowna area. But the degree to which these have been coordinated remains to be seen. So unfortunately, it seems like a lot of good reports with good recommendations may be sitting on a shelf somewhere or only partially implemented. And this is from one of those reports. In that report, this is the Central Okanagan Community Protection Plan of 2010. Now, 2010, that was a year after a big wildfire hit Kelowna. Now, just so that you know, the area that's crossed out here, this was done by our wildfire forestry consultant, but he's noting that this was variously addressed over the last decade. And Kelowna Bridge, which you may have seen in pictures, is in this area with the red square. The area that was on fire prior to August the 18th, 2023 are identified fuels immediately to the left of the red box. So that area, and this area is Crown land and First Nations land. And these were identified in the Community Wildfire Protection Plan as a high priority treatment for the establishment of fire breaks. These are regional fire starts since 1950. And this is from the same plan. So if you look here, you can see the 2003 and 2009 fire perimeters. These are this kind of shaded area. Here we go, all around here. It's huge, that's enormous. And you can see all of these yellow dots are human-caused fires. Sometimes they're caused by camping, fireworks, negligent campfire, cigarette butts. You know, there are many human causes using equipment outside. Sometimes it sparks on something. In very dry conditions, that will turn into a wildfire. But you can see that there are many human-caused wildfires. And look at the number of them in the West Kelowna area. And this is an area where the houses are all nestled in the trees, and they're all on these tiny little roads that have very poor access for firefighting equipment. Look at them, dozens and dozens of them. So just before we get into some pictures about different kinds of fuel load that's on the ground there, this is actually from Australia, but it gives you, so it looks like eucalyptus trees, which are not native here, but it will give you an idea of what we're talking about. So there's surface fuel, which is like litter on the ground. There's near surface fuel, which are like these little shrubs or little plants that grow, you know, maybe like a foot or so high. Elevated fuel, these are higher shrubs. And bark fuel, sometimes trees are dead and rotting, or the bark is coming off them. This takes a little bit longer for them to light on fire. All this stuff here on the bottom, this is like kindling. Whoosh, this will go up in a moment if there's a spark. And then the canopy. The canopy is not normally considered part of a fuel load, although it certainly can catch on fire, and then you can have fire hopping from tree to tree. So this is from the report that I've been reviewing maps from the Regional District of Central Okanagan Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And there are some identified fuel types. We'll look at the pictures in a moment. The fuel types are problematic because they contain a large component of mountain pine beetle damaged stands. So lots of damaged mountain pine beetle trees that are just standing there for the past decade, drying out. This is the terminology for these different types of fuel types, and I'll show them to you. It makes more sense when you see them, that account for 30% of the area. The actual fuel loadings in these stands is significantly heavier than the standard fuel type models, and the wildfire behavior is consequently very extreme, which is what we saw last week. There are also abandoned rangeland dry shrub and grass fuel types that have no counterpart in the Canadian fuel type classification system, which have fuel loads and flammability comparable to those in California. And California fires also really take off in the wind. And this Community Wildfire Protection Plan contains many recommendations and identifies specific concerns and opportunities. So let's consider these examples. So here we are talking about some surface fuel litter. You can see that there's a lot of stuff on the ground, very small little plants, lots of litter around. And here some near surface fuel. So we've got lots of fallen logs, branches. These are very dry and will easily catch fire once the litter on the ground catches fire. And on top of that, we've got elevated fuel, we've got greater risk. You can see these are dead trees here, fallen over. Some of them, the fire will just candle right up that dead tree. And this is what it means. This is what it means. This is the fire behavior risk. This is modeled fire behavior rating across this area. And that's really what we saw tragically in the past few days. It seems like people have short memories because there was a devastating wildfire in Kelowna in 2003 and then another one in 2009. And yet, here we have the Globe and Mail saying in the summer of 2023, Canadians woke up to the reality of climate change amid fire and smoke. Well, they say now we've seen and smelled the future, what'll we do? Well, it's not the future, it's just a repeat of the past. And sadly, Kelowna, the city of Kelowna was very busy with an intelligent city strategy, hoping to connect people digitally and make the city much better. But in fact, if you search this for wildfire, which would be one of the biggest risks in the region and the most catastrophic, there is no exact match for that word. There's only one mention of fire here. So not so intelligent. And now the problem is that climate activists are trying to divert attention from these practical things that should have been done, that could still be done, that must go on and be done. They're diverting attention to climate change. And if we look at this report that we did quite a few years ago, 2019, and Robert Lyman was simply looking at the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 plan, strictly at the climate part of it. And he said one cannot help but be struck by the range of initiatives underway, many of which have escaped media attention in Canada. The spending commitments alone are eye-opening. $180 billion for infrastructure, $20 billion for green infrastructure, $28.7 billion for public transit, $25.3 billion for social infrastructure, and $10.1 billion for trade and transportation. The document expresses a profound belief that all this will increase Canada's future prosperity, ignoring the fact that, apart from the trade and transportation investments, there's no obvious reason why this should be so. So it seems like the government has committed all kinds of money for green cronies, but if we don't have a viable society, because much of it is decimated from wildfires that we didn't properly manage in terms of the forest and the wildland human interface, then what kind of trade can we do? And of course, immediately, here's Jonathan Wilkinson, I think it was yesterday, saying that Canada wildfires, climate change is a scientific reality. That's true. It is a scientific reality, but that's not what the wildfires are about. And I just showed you that the IPCC doesn't even say that. And Minister Wilkinson says we have to have a plan. Well, as I showed you, Kelowna had at least 6 of them, which were largely ignored. So just to go back to what Roger Pielke said, the IPCC has not detected or attributed fire occurrence or area burned to human-caused climate change. It requires more than fire weather, it requires fuel and a source of ignition, and human activities have become the dominant driver. And indeed, here is BC Wildfire Service tweeting back in, I think it was 20 2020 or something like that. On average, 42% of BC wildfires are human-caused, with 59% sparked by people last year. And we can see this here from the OECD, which is from Roger PLK's Substack, talking about reducing the risks of extreme wildfires through prevention, fuel management, fuel breaks and buffer zones, prescribed and cultural burns, adaptive ecosystem management, ecosystem protection and restoration, land use planning, that means don't put houses in the forest, make sure there's an exclusion zone, building codes and standards, same thing, infrastructure network resilience, so that's power lines that interfere with trees. Wildfire risk assessment, that's what those reports were all about, and wildfire risk awareness. That's what every single person can do. And the problem is, because this is so tragic and so frightening, that a lot of times fear plus urgency will lead to stupid, drastic decisions with unpredictable side effects. That's a quote from Hans Rosling's book Factfulness, wherein he talks about some of the experiences he had as a public health expert in crisis situations. So the whole emphasis, which continues to be on the claim of a crisis, of a climate emergency, this will misdirect very important public funds for recovery and restoration of people's homes and communities. Building wind turbines or solar farms would not have done a single thing to stop or mitigate any of the wildfires that we've seen. In fact, there is an MIT report showing that wind turbines and wind farms raise ambient temperature and dry out the soil, and that solar farms also raise ambient temperatures very significantly. So these are not the solution to climate change and global warming. They are a cause of the problem. So that would be going in exactly the wrong direction. What we need to do is to sit down and assess the challenges and the opportunities and the means to repair and prevent in the future. We need to invest in wildfire fighting equipment, and we need to enact the plans that have been written and put on shelves rather than putting them back on shelves. So I recommend that everybody have a look at Fire Smart in Telefeu. There is a French translation button right up there. And they do a good description of the wildland-urban interface. And really the point of this is learn what to do what you can, and be prepared and not scared. So this is, I think, a very wise thing that Dr. Judith Curry wrote. Thinking that catastrophes like major hurricane landfalls, massive forest fires, etc. will be cured by eliminating fossil fuel emissions is laughable. Well, it's not really funny. Thinking that eliminating fossil fuel emissions will solve the problem of extreme weather events is very sad, sort of on the level of doing rain dances. Everything that goes wrong, they blame on fossil fuel-driven climate change. Imagine how surprised they would be if we were to ever be successful at eliminating fossil fuel emissions, and then we still had bad weather. In fact, climate change is a cyclical phenomenon. It's not you, it's not CO2. And this is a graphical representation showing the longer term stripes of climate change. You may have seen the short-term ones that Greta Thunberg has on the cover of her book. That's kind of this area that she has. But when you look at the longer historical record, you get a picture of, wow, there have been some very significant cyclical changes in warming and cooling over just the past 2,000 years. And since human-caused climate change is only considered to have begun in about 1950, then obviously this is all natural. So why wouldn't this be natural? If you'd like to know more about climate science and climate economics, please come to our event this fall. It's October the 17th at 6 p.m. at the Red and White Club at McMahon Stadium in Calgary. The theme this year is Break Free from Climate Tyranny, Evidence over Ideology. Our two speakers will be Robert Lyman, who's an energy economist. His topic is, when will climate policy hit the wall? Robert has been a long-time contributor to us. He was a federal public servant for 27 years, a diplomat for 10 years, and he worked on the GHG-related files most of his professional life. And we'll also have Dr. Ian Clark, Emeritus Professor from the University of Ottawa, and he'll be doing a reality check on climate and net zero. So early bird pricing is over, but if you join our organization, then you get a small member discount along with all of our newsletters and such like. Again, you know, our condolences go out to all the people in BC and all across Canada who have lost property and lost, you know, there have been also some lost lives. But we can't keep pretending that climate action is going to solve these problems. What will solve these problems is wildland-human interface action and taking action according to these various reports that show us things we can do. And according to FireSmart and FireWise in the US, that give homeowners and communities very practical tips on what you can do to protect your home and your community. So I strongly recommend that people have a look at those and you know, see what you can do. Get your neighbors together, go talk with your town council. If you don't have a plan in place already, put one in place. These organizations have lots of useful information, practical information, things that you can do right now, and most of them don't cost a lot of money to do either. So, and it can probably save you a lot of money. Sometimes they can even save your house. So, again, these are very troubled and tragic times, but let's not make them worse by going off the deep end on climate action. And we really need to use our precious, limited public funds to protect the public and to make sure that our communities are safe as possible, and that we can restore people's lives as best we can under the circumstances. Thanks for watching our explainer. We'll be doing one on Yellowknife as well. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.